What's happening, everybody? Charlie here again this week, and this week we're going to be walking through a pretty lengthy video in terms of setting up our nested ESXi home lab. So let's get started. So currently I'm connected to my local ESXi host here at home, which is this IP address. And here at the top we have a few variables that are already set. The host name of my ESXi host, the 3 nested ESXi hosts that we're going to be setting up, just a get vcenter. We're making a variable for all of our ESXi hosts, the location of my the location of my ISO. I actually forgot one more here, which is the hard drive 3, and that's going to equal 7. And then my MAC addresses for my 3 ESXi hosts. So let's go ahead and get started. First thing that we're going to start off doing is we're going to set the promiscuous mode for my ESXi host. And so let's go ahead and get VirtualSwitch name, and the switch name is v6.5. And then we're going to set that security policy on that switch. And then we're going to set that. To allow promiscuous. So let's go ahead and execute these variables thus far. I don't actually have a vcenter online right now, so that's why this one's failing. So we'll go ahead and remove that. And then we'll go ahead and let's first off check the promiscuous mode on this host. So we'll select this code here, and I can either press this button up here or F8 to execute just that. And so currently it's set to not allow promiscuous. So we're going to go ahead and select the whole line and execute that. And it actually changes that to true. Alright, so now once we got the promiscuous mode set for our ESXi host, we're going to go into actually creating our first VMHost. And so we're going to, the way I'm going to be stepping through this is I'm going to step through each one of these hosts manually and then progress from there. So we're going to create a new VM. This new VM host is going to be called $host1, which is the variable we have named up top. So that's the host we're connecting to, and then the host name we're going to give it is ESXi host 2. And then the we're going to choose a Datastore where we're going to put this. And then we're going to do a get VM, and then we're going to set the memory for this host. We're going to set the number of CPUs to 2. We're going to tell it to not confirm what we want to do. And let's go ahead and execute at least those first 2 lines. We're going to call this VMHost1 and see how it does thus far. So we have an error here. Oh, I forgot to put a space in there. Alright. So we'll go ahead and execute. It actually created that first line, and let's go ahead and see if it actually sets the parameters of 6 gigs of RAM and 2 CPUs. So that confirms. So now we're going to go ahead and modify the ScsiController. On VMHost 2. And then for this lab, we're actually going to set the type to VirtualLsiLogic. Then we're going to do a get VM, and we're going to set the hard drive on it. Oops, sorry about that. We're going to set the hard disk and the capacity. So we define a variable up top called $HardDrive1. And we're going to confirm that. We're going to tell it not to confirm it. Alright, so let's go ahead and execute those next 2 lines. We'll watch it one line at a time. Sets the controller to a VirtualLsiLogic. Execute the next line. And it sets the hard drive to 4 gigs, which is the variable that we set up top here. Alright, let's keep progressing through creating our first host. We're going to actually create another hard drive on this VM. So in this case, we're creating a new hard disk. That'll be the variable for the second hard drive. Tell this to not confirm. Go ahead and execute that. Creates that 6 gig hard drive on the same SSD that we defined before. And then let's keep progressing with the last hard drive on this host. And the capacity is going to be, in this time, it's going to be 7 gigs. And then we're going to tell that to not confirm also. Let's execute that line. Alright, so we've gone ahead and created all of our hard drives. In this case, we're going to be setting up a nested ESXi hosts that have vSAN written on them eventually. So let's go ahead, and the next ones that we're going to set up the network adapters. Whoops. We're going to tell it to remove it because we want to use VMXnet. to tell it not to confirm it. Alright, so we'll go ahead and do that. So let's go ahead and we're going to create a new NIC for management network on it. And then I'm going to statically define this MAC address that I had defined up here in my variable list, because I'm going to be telling my router to automatically have this reservation for this MAC address. So every time I create this ESXi host, it'll automatically boot up with this IP address that I have set on the router. So we're going to tell it to start connected. Oops. The type is VMXnet 3, and we're going to tell it not to confirm. Alright, go ahead and execute that. Alright, so this NIC that we created here was for NIC is for NIC is for management, and then we'll go ahead and create our NIC for vSAN. Okay, so now that we need to do that, we need to create another network adapter. And then we're going to tell which host we're talking about. I'm going to use the same port group. We're going to tell it to start connected. The type is VMXnet 3, and confirm $false. Alright, so we'll create that second adapter. That's completed. Now we're going to add a CD-ROM to these, because we're going to boot from ISO on them. I'm going to tell it the isopath that we define up in the variable list. And we're going to tell it to start connected. We're going to tell it not to confirm that. Let's go ahead and create that CD-ROM on that host. Looks like, wait, I got a problem in my script here. Looks like I defined the isopath. So after looking over my code, I realized that I was missing a statement here that needs to be true, that it's going to start connected for the CD-ROM. So let's go ahead and re-execute that. And that successfully runs, so it creates that CD-ROM and then mounts that ISO to that. And then we're going to go ahead and start up our VM. So let's go ahead and look at the thick client that I have on this. And there's my ESXi host, and it should be starting up right now, so we should be able to see the console and what's occurring on this host. So one of the other tricks that I like to use is after I execute, as opposed to using the thick client, is I like to use the command from PowerCLI open-vm console window, and then tell it the host that I'm actually going to be opening up in there, and just confirm the certificate on it. And it's a lot easier way as opposed to using the web client or the thick client, so that you can keep scripting away. So there's our ESXi host. Still booting up. So our VM finished booting up. It's asking us to confirm installation. So we'll walk through these steps. Press F11. I'm going to choose to install it on the 4 gig drive that I created first. Hit enter, choose US default. You can go ahead and ignore this warning. It basically says that the hardware isn't compatible. Just make sure that it's on in the BIOS. And go ahead and hit continue. It's going to ask if you're sure if you want to install it on that HBA. Press F11, and there you go. And we'll go ahead and fast forward through this, because this shouldn't take very long at all, because we're on SSDs and have it in a nested ESXi host environment. Alright, now that that's complete, I'm going to go ahead and leave it at this prompt, and I'm going to close out this VMRC console window. I'm going to go back to my code, and we're going to go ahead, and one of the things I like to do as I'm learning PowerCLI is segment my code. So I'm gonna, before I get into for each loops, I wanted to show you guys how I actually set up my first lab this way. So we're going to just call this complete. This one is complete, and we're going to segment that code off. So one of the things that I'm going to do next is I'm going to copy this creation. I'm going to make another host that is exactly like that. And I'm going to just replace the variable names for my host. So this is going to be the host creation for VMHost 2. And so we'll just go ahead and go down through right here. We're going to replace this with VMHost. This is going to be VMHost 3, VMHost 3, 3, 3. And then we'll be able to execute that same exact code again, and we'll call this in the comments VMHost 2. We also need to make sure that we change the MAC address on our second host. We'll go ahead and execute this code here, creating our second VM and automatically starting it up and open up a console. While that's executing, we'll copy this same code again. And I'll give you guys a shortcut of how I replace a bunch of text with a different variable name. So let's say that, for instance, that I'm creating VMHost 3 now. If I have all this text selected, and I select it all, hit Control H, and replace VMHost 3 with host 4. I can go ahead and replace all that in this text that I have selected. And then we just got to make sure that we change the MAC address for that host. So let's go ahead and execute the code for VMHost 3. And be able to see that creating and installing VMHost 4 here. It's going to automatically boot to the ISO that we specified. And I'll quickly fast forward through the progression of hosts 3 and 4 just to show you guys that it's the same setup that we did on host ESXi host 2. Alright, now that my ESXi hosts have completed loading, I can write a small script to disconnect the CD-ROM and reboot. So let's go ahead and get started with that. We'll do a get-cd drive and -vm. We're going to tell it the all hosts variable that we defined up top, which is all my ESXi hosts. Then go ahead and set CD drive, no media, and then we're going to tell it to not confirm this. And then we're going to tell it to restart all of our VMs. And not confirm that as well. Let's go ahead and execute this small code. And this red here is just indicating that the CD-ROM wasn't connected on these hosts. Let's go ahead and go back over to our consoles to our ESXi hosts. There's ESXi host 3, there's 4, and we'll bring up another command prompt. A VMRC for VM console for 2. And we'll go ahead and fast forward through this reboot. My ESXi host 2 came out with an IP address of 201, which I had set on my router. ESXi host 3 came out with an IP address of 202, and then my third ESXi host came out with an IP address of 203, all based on me having those reservations on my router. So again, that came down to this variable of setting the MAC address on each one of those NICs. And for those variables that I had up here. So this completes stage 1 of setting up a nested ESXi host. Hope you liked the video. Watch for a video next week on progression of this, where we're going to be actually connecting these hosts to vCenter, as well as setting up vSAN and things that we can do with that. So yeah, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, and again, appreciate everybody's support. So thanks again for watching, and this is VM Rockstar checking out.